We from the Older Brother Council have declared Maru with a negative 50 billion aura, in spite of his gain of 30 billion aura from this chapter. This is because he had to be stopped by his younger brother. No, we do not care that they are twins. It's still an aura loss. What's up, guys? They are with a pencil here from Fat. Have it on me and keep it on me at all times. Another fun fact. Did I have Maru being a monster on my bingo card? Yes, because it was kind of obvious. Did I have him being this much of a monster in this predicament this quickly? We're only 6 chapters deep? No. So while I do have it on me and keep it on me at all times, I did not know that Maru had that dog literally subconsciously built into him. As such, I really like this chapter. So let's not waste any more time and let's hop right into chapter 6 of Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo, which is known as Berserk. What was that? As you see, everything is rising. I do want to give quick shoutouts to everyone who can actually read, unlike your boy. I just do happen to be illiterate. This was Maru. No duh, it was Maru. It was not the girl. I don't know what I was cooking. Because why on earth would it be the girl when we're literally shown Maru the page after, and at the end of the chapter, it's literally shown his presence makes things rise up. Like, what was I thinking? But with that being the case, it is a very interesting time to speculate on what Maru's curse technique actually is, or whatever they will call curse techniques. But with that being the case, let's hop right back into chapter 6, now that I thank everyone for helping me read. Because there's some things that is basic reading comprehension that I just don't have. With that being the case, Takada, who I will still keep calling him that, because I don't want to just call him the old guy, so we're going to call him Takada. Sorry. I guess he didn't like that. He nearly stabbed me through the throat with a needle. But with it being the case, Takada says, "What was that?" And naturally, Surugi's like, gang left you back at the house, Maru? And notably, Takada turns and is like, "I thought I'd knocked him out by the house. When did he get behind me?" Now, this is interesting in of itself, because obviously, Takada here isn't like a monster, but he's clearly not a poor sorcerer, meaning he presumably does have, like, relatively decent sensory. This isn't a Naruto thing where only some ninja can sense other ninja. No, like, in JJK, you can sense your fellow sorcerers. So it is interesting that Maru was able to sneak up on Takada completely unawares. Which does make me wonder, like, how different sorcery as we know it, and cursed energy usage as we know it, differs from how the Samurians use cursed energy. As notably, it was described only back in chapter 1, that sorcerers have similar abilities to what the Samurians have, but they aren't exactly the same. So I wonder if Maru can even be traditionally sensed, or this is just the guy being off guard and confused by everything else rising around him. Sort of like how, even though you hear something, if it's not immediately or like shockingly loud, you won't notice it if other things are happening, right? So many a time I will be listening to something or doing something else, but something will be happening in front of me or I'm engaged in something else and I don't turn to look. Maybe that's it, because we know the sorcery sensory stuff acts as like a sixth sense on top of your other 5 senses. So maybe he just didn't sense Maru approaching, but still, it's interesting that Maru was able to sneak up. And notably, I do want to mention how Maru is moving, or at least put heavy attention on it so I can talk about it again later. So note how Maru is slowly but surely walking towards Takada and not necessarily bum rushing him, at least not immediately. And you can tell that this was not really expected for anybody, as Surugi is shocked and Takada is shocked and asks, "You can still move?" And notably, Maru's eyes are closed. Except for the third one. That one's wide open. And notably, it keeps making sounds this chapter. It goes gwip, gwip here, and it will make other sounds later on that I will point out. Now, this is interesting. Notably, I was wondering what this was. At first, I was in the live reaction. You can check it over on Patreon for those $1 month. Become a member for those $3 a month. I thought that maybe this was him being remote controlled. But no, it just... Wait, I need to turn this off. Sorry, it just got a little bit duller, but I heard the buzzing. Oh, I heard the buzzing. But, in fact... I'm sorry, if there's a slight buzzing in the first 4 minutes, that's the old ring light. I used this for the other content too, still, because I'm too lazy to actually figure out how to sync these two up. But with that being the case, we see that Maru's third eye is very particularly peering around things, and at least from the angle he's walking at. Notably, one of the things it takes note of in the environment is Surugi, right? Because we can see that Maru's facing head on with Takada, but his eye isn't actually looking at Takada, at least not seemingly. Based on the fact that it's looking to Maru's left, it's actually focusing on Surugi here, which is interesting, considering the eye is having effects on everything in the area, except for living beings, you would think that their weaponry would raise up. And it seems like the rising ability that Maru has, once again I'm going to talk about the theoretical meaning or abilities behind Maru's curse technique, or whatever his equivalent to a curse technique is in a second, but we see that he registers Surugi but does not attack him, and notably he will go on to not attack Surugi until Surugi puts himself directly in the line of fire and sort of acts as a threat. So Maru is moving unconsciously except for the third eye. Now, of course, there is a twofold question here. Is this much more akin to spoilers for the Dragon Ball Super manga, but it's so relevant because it's never going to be animated, because Dragon Ball's never getting another anime continuation, at least that's what it feels like at this point. For reference, Superhero came out, wasn't it like 4 years ago now, going on 6? DBS Superhero Hero. I mean Daima, but Daima doesn't count because it's like, is Daima even? I don't think Daima's canon. But with it being the case, I mean, if it's open flame with that one. Let's see, Dragon Ball Superhero. When did that come out? It came out 22. So it's only been 3 years. It's only been 3 years, going on 4. But still, the Dragon Ball manga's never getting at this point, bro. I'm not even sure if it's continuing, and I know why. It's for good reason, but still, it doesn't look like it's gonna be continuing. So, light spoilers, but take it on a grain of salt. There are the heaters in the Dragon Ball Super Granola arc. And very specifically, they have this thing that they can do where they revert to their quote-unquote base instincts. All this does is jack up their power level a whole lot, which seems to be the case with Maru in one way, but then again, we just haven't seen base Maru fight all too much. Then again, we gotta... Actually, I think we technically did get a little bit of reference to what base Maru should be capable of, considering he reacts to the Kalyan and, like, fights it a little bit, and he does seemingly get worked just a little bit. But at the same time, base Maru, and very akin to the heaters when they enter their primal instinct state, quote-unquote, they do seemingly lose control of themselves, seemingly have much higher battle power, and move in normal or non-normal ways. Very specifically, Maru is aura farming throughout the entire chapter, and it's notably due to the eye. Now, in a difference from the heaters and what they do with their whole primal instincts thing versus what Maru is doing, is that his main eyes are closed, but his third eye is open. The heaters, their eyes are just regular. They don't gain other eyes. If anything, just they get horns. So it is interesting, and it's also interesting that it does register Surugi but does not attack him. Now, if this is due to Surugi being related to Maru in the sense that they are friends and or allies, meanwhile Takada is the enemy, that could be one thing, and or Surugi, since he's like on the ground, just may not be considered a threat worth actually taking care of, as the eye goes quip quip, and Takada's like, the third eye, is that thing real? And suddenly the third eye stops looking at Surugi and flips right back to Takada, and immediately blasts open back to the original thing that we saw happen to the human. Can I say that? The guy who was taking people. If you'll remember all the way back in chapter 1, the guy who was taking people was immediately knocked out by this interaction right here, where the third eye opened and blasted. And notably, the eye does seem to gain a level of clarity that it doesn't have normally. Look at it being a mostly white pupil here, or mostly white iris, and then it blasts open, gets this extra detail, seems to stress itself a little bit, and then Takada immediately gets consumed. Now, but, of course, Takada, being a rather skilled sorcerer at this point, or at least curse user, is actually able to somewhat register what's going on here, and goes, oh, is he trying to trigger a state of mental confusion? And immediately Takada stabs himself to negate it. But Takada, as a response to this reaction in particular, loses the ability to maintain his guardian spirit, aka Shikigami, aka his Kalyan. So this does not become a matter of the fight anymore. In fact, it entirely disappears. But he does still maintain at least all of his actual tangible physical stuff. But his Kalyan does not reappear for the entire rest of the chapter. So this is interesting. It is also interesting that the impact point seems to be directly above the eye, but not the eye itself. If you'll notice where Maru is bleeding from, it's like, well, he fell on his dome, but notably his eye itself does not appear to be bleeding, as it's like it blinks whenever it would go to blink. The blood that is pulled from above the eye is dripping beneath it. So when Maru fell, I guess he fell on his head. Let me see something. Hold on, I actually want to take a look. When Maru fell, come here, Maru. I need to take a look at when you fell, buddy. Do you fall flat face first? Yeah, no, it is interesting. He falls on his side, right? Like he gets presumably stabbed here, falls on his side, and he's laying on his side in chapter 4. And I believe this does continue in chapter, yeah, he lays on his side. So I'm not exactly sure where we got the head wound from that's causing the bleeding, so, but he does have that. It's not specifically from falling face first like I thought it was initially, and then he rises up. But with that being the case, Maru uses this seemingly, I'm not going to say knockout ability, but as Takada identifies it, a state of mental confusion. You can even see that his eyes start to spread out. He begins to drool. He starts sweating immensely. It's almost like Maru raises your body. And I'm going to keep saying raise. Don't worry, it's going to feed into my theory about his curse technique. But Maru essentially raises all of Takada's senses to 11. And the only way that Takada is able to seemingly get any sort of control back is by literally impaling himself. This does confirm Takada doesn't have any sort of RCT, of course, because he doesn't actually heal this hand for the rest of the chapter, which does make sense. RCT is not that common. But on top of that, this actually does, while it removes the Guardian Spirit from the fight, or the Shikigami from the fight, it doesn't actually knock out Takada. In fact, it seems like Maru even knew this was the case, because he immediately goes to dome Takada with a piece of concrete. One of the many stones that is raising up out of the ground, Maru grabs and then launches it, very specifically pitching it directly at Takada. And we see Takada barely manage to respond, specifically turning in time as Maru reels back with the pitch in the left, launches it, but spontaneously it curves. It raises around the strike that Takada was going to do it to at least block the rock, and he immediately gets domed. Notably though, it doesn't actually do too much damage to Takada himself. He just is confused and goes, what the heck? As he gets beamed by the rock anyway. And it puts him on the top of this. I think this is like a slide? But obviously, the idea of Maru's motions varying and how much this is a conscious application of Maru's own abilities versus an unconscious one is debated, because notably, he is walking, like I mentioned, he's ore farming for the first part of the chapter, but then he immediately goes to combo off the blitz. He throws the rock, it pitches around, it moves, it clocks Takada right in the dome, it sends him flying, which shows just how much force it was moving with, even after its trajectory was manipulated. And then we see Maru lunging from the side, eye still wide open, very specifically eye only, the top one, and he immediately comes in with the axe kick of doom and despair. So he is definitely going to physically try to slaughter Takada here. But Takada does react in time to at least throw themselves off of this foundation. And once again, this shows Maru's raw physical strength is a whole lot higher than what it at least has been implied to be. Notably, we've seen Maru do some physical stuff before, like he grabbed onto, I forget his name, the old Sada. I know that's not his, it's something Sada, but like old Sada from who had the shark suit, he was able to grab onto him, but he wasn't able to do too much. But we see Maru with an axe kick, presumably with very little, if not zero leverage, since he's doing this in mid-air, goes down and immediately shatters the entire whatever this is. Once again, I'm not sure if this is a slide or a piece of the playground or whatever, but he immediately breaks it apart and literally releases so much force that it's not just shattering, but there's like a shockwave that even blows Takada back in combination with his dodge. So Maru is very physically active here, and notably he is stacking his technique and his physicals, which is shockingly more rare than you think in the JJK universe for some reason or another. I personally don't know why isn't more common practice, but if you look, he very specifically uses the eye to set up mental confusion / presumably raise all of Takada's senses and pressure so much that he almost passes out and loses himself to delirium, but then loses control over his Kallion. He then keeps the pressure on using a physical motion, aka throwing the rock and then combining it with his CT in order to redirect the rock when Takada goes to intercept it, to beam him in the head, and then he immediately goes for the downswing. This is a clear mix of using your technique to set up in order to get the physicals off, which does imply that Maru is much more a mixed attacker, which fits into the general archetype of some of the stronger characters in JJK, where they have a mix of ranged abilities and a strong curse technique on top of very good physicals, which Maru does seem to have, fitting Maru into the whole idea that, oh yeah, he's actually just a little bit cracked. But we see that as he drops down, Takada is able to avoid it, and notably, Surugi is still conscious enough to protect Yuka, who did gas very, very quickly. I'm still not sure what that is from. Like, obviously, in the end of the last chapter, she was a little bit eepy and then literally got stabbed from behind. She literally got stabbed through the shoulder. So it does make sense. And I suppose Surugi staying conscious despite getting twice the needles inside of him is a testament to, you know, his heavenly restriction to some degree. I have seen hot debate on whether or not, Surugi is complete or not, but it seems like the common consensus is that he's not. And the main reason he's able to pull off this is because he has at least a little bit of cursed energy inside of him, and maybe his heavenly restriction is being suppressed by the ring, right? Because ultimately, even if the ring is quote-unquote meant to protect him, it still definitely is a legacy or item a legacy item with high amounts of cursed energy, meaning that it could actually be interfering with its heavenly restriction to some degree, but at the same time, him having an incomplete or temporary heavenly restriction may allow him to use the new shadow style and manipulate cursed energy at all in the first place. Because we can't sit here and say that Maki and Toji were unskilled in the world of Jujutsu, but they may have literally been unallowed to perform something like this. Like, without any cursed energy inside them, it could be entirely possible that they legit could not perform this. Whether it be this is just an evolution of how cursed energy control has gotten over the past 68 years, or something along those lines, I don't think that Maki or Toji could have pulled this off, even if they knew the steps how to, because I think you need at least a little bit of cursed energy. And apparently, the translations do fit that interpretation more than the idea that Maru is, that Surugi is already complete, but he just isn't as strong as his grandparents because he's not old enough. And very specifically, the only reason I don't think it's the whole he's not old enough thing, and like he's already complete, is because he's actually older than Maki was. Like, if you'll remember when Maki was declared equal to Toji, she was only 16, I do believe, and Surugi is 17, so I feel like he just isn't complete yet. What the conditions for his completion are, though, are still hotly debated in the community, and I don't even know, because I don't think it's losing Yuka. I don't think losing Yuka would do anything for him, because once again, they are not actually twins. So, I don't know, his heavenly restriction may just be lower, as Maki and Toji were both anomalies. Toji, a completely naturally born anomaly, meanwhile, Maki was a specific anomaly that existed due to special criteria with the twin situation going on. So it is a pretty funky thing. But back to chapter 6, we do get to see that Surugi protects Yuka after her getting stabbed, and he also still has 2 stab wounds in him, but he ultimately admits, I had no idea Maru was this strong. No, something's not right here. And that's what had me believe he was at least being somewhat remote controlled. But the more and more I see Maru, the more and more I assume, or specifically more and more I reread this chapter, I'm assuming this is what Maru was like, not necessarily programmed, but kind of like trained for. Essentially, there's the idea that even if you were to, let's say, wipe out a good fighter's conscious, right? Like, say, completely shut down, like, the active part of their brain. Their bodies are so trained to certain scenarios and stimuli that they'd still be able to fight very, very well. This idea is typically covered in comics. If you'll remember, when Jason Todd was revived from the dead, he lost all his memories after being in the Lazarus pit. He had an incomplete resurrection. However, it was noted that he was able to still fight and defend himself perfectly fine because his body was literally trained to do so. And it seems that may be the same case for Maru here. The only reason I question that is because his eye is open. But he's specifically noted to be unconscious later on in this chapter, and it's clear that his eyes and his face are rather disengaged. Notably, I have to give credit to Yuji Iwasaka-sensei as the artist, because Maru's face never shifts. He is truly unconscious here. You see his face here, you see his face again here, you see his face one more time. Even here, while it has the menacing aura, it's mainly the eye that's doing a lot of the emoting and expressing and seemingly guiding for Maru, while Maru himself is knocked out. So how much this is conscious training of Maru that's being manifested through the danger state he's quote-unquote put in, and or how much of this is possible external interference, unknown. Cross will only go to make this more difficult to discern later in the chapter. I promise you, I thought he would help after a reread. He only made it worse. But with that being the case, we see that Maru's abilities are still affecting everything, but notably only the inanimate objects, because as he knocked, well, very specifically knocked, it seems like he knocks Takada into the gymnasium, all these balls, both basketballs and volleyballs, all go out. But very specifically, they don't just go out and bounce, they immediately start to rise. After they fall out of the container here, we'll see everything is still rising from the basketball. I'll get to this. From the basketballs to the rocks around the area, which does imply a more AoE effect. But note once again how everything is rising. Nothing is actually like just floating randomly. Everything's being picked up. The only time a trajectory change isn't like straight rising, it's technically here, but even then you'll note that the rock curves upward and around. You could argue it's like an angling thing, and what Yuji Usagi here is drawing the rock maybe like just straight weave. It does seem to have an upwards angle, like it would be aiming for his hand here, at least the way Takada aims it here, but the rock actually clocks his dome. So I even think this is an example of it rising and maybe a more focused application. Initially I thought it was just telekinesis, but then we see something later on that makes you think it's not telekinesis, and then there's this moment right here. Oh, but before I get too into that, we do see that Maru, like I mentioned, is aura farming. How much of this can be instinctual when he goes from, alright, we're going to take a nice slow walk all the way over here, to we're going to immediately blitz over and try to axe kick you into oblivion, back to walking. Once again, it's very wibbly wobbly. I'm not sure how much of this is Gege being like, hey, no, this has got to be really, really consistent. Make sure you keep track of this for later interactions, and or how much of this is just showing off how powerful Maru is. Or it could be a mix of both, like a variance in personality born of whatever is happening to him right now, as Cross does recognize it. And the chapter is literally called Berserk, so like, I still don't know. But with it being the case, we see that Takeda admits, I should have killed him when I had the chance. And Maru walks up like, for real? You think you got that, big bro? Let's see. As, what? I'm so sorry. One moment. Allow me to think a little sippy whippy, because that actually scared the soul out of me. Scrumdiddly-umptious. But with it being the case, Maru's walking in like, oh, you should have had when you had the chance, right? Because you know you ain't got no chance right now. As Maru walks in, the eyes completely locked in on Takeda, and we see Cross. Now, this does make you wonder how long Cross has been around. Like, was he around in the original missions? Notably, we see him during the Usami talks, specifically leading Dabura out. We're going to talk about Dabura in a second, I'm not going to lie to you. But Cross is here, he's in the vicinity, and he's watching. You can see the hole that Takeda got blown through into the gymnasium, all the way from wherever the playground structure that they were on was, once again showing more sheer levels of force. But at the same time, Cross is here, and he is observing, and he even says, Maru, to think you lost control so easily, you're truly a fool, brother. So, he does view this as sort of a lost state of control, which is why my brain keeps going back to the idea that it's very much like the Heaters and what they did in the Dragon Ball Super manga with the whole releasing their instincts thing when they removed that piece. It's typically, I think it's like a necklace. Gas, the one who does it, like he's literally the only one who does it. It's like pulled from around his head, I do believe. But with it being the case, this does make me wonder, is this an innate state to all Sumerians? Is it something unique to Maru and Cross? We just don't know. Obviously, there are unique things that we as humans all have, but we also do all have the same adrenaline response, even if it doesn't trigger uniformly. Like, obviously, the whole idea of fight versus flight. There are some humans that are programmed to lose it all and just fight immediately. There are some humans who are programmed to run. Hi, I think I'm the latter, but I don't know, and I never want to find out. But that being the case, maybe this is something that only some of them can do. These very specific rising and everything, though, I feel like that may be unique to Maru. But who knows? Once again, we do not understand enough about the Sumerians and their abilities and how much is universal. And very specifically, the few Sumerians we've seen may either all be related in the case of, I just realized that man has multiple layered ears. His ears look disgusting. Where are Maru's ears? Wait a second. Sorry, like, I had a very specific attention while I was going into this. The hell, I guess maybe is it meant, maybe I'm tweaking. Why do his ears look so weird here? Like it has the initial hole and the second hole and the third. I think it just have tiny ears. Like hold on, 1, 2, 3. No, yeah, I don't know. I guess I just never. QG was talking since it was like take this ear detail. Technically, that's normal. Like I think the reason I was focusing on ears is because obviously Dabura here has the super long ears, but like. Technically, no, it's right. It's just 1, 2, 3. For some reason, looking at it here, I guess it's because it's just so well detailed and that's really done, especially not by your boy. But with it being the case, Cross is here. He's observing. I'm assuming he's stuck around. He's either been here the entire time, which, but it could. It's hard to tell though, because very specifically, Maru does mention the second I use any cursed energy or my cursed technique. Yeah, my little brother is here, and he may report that, and that's not going to be a good thing. So, like, that may be the case. He may be always watching in close vicinity, and if that's the case, they've never been unwatched. They've never been in any real danger because Cross is here, and Cross does at least seem to be very, very powerful, considering what he will go on to do later on in this chapter. I would say, so far, Maru is the strongest character we've seen active, and Cross will go on to immediately subdue him at the end of this chapter. However, we see that Cross is of a certain ideation, a certain faction, a certain belief, which does lead into the conquest, or not conquest, in fact, not that, but lead into an interesting question that we'll get into in a little bit. We see that Cross thinks, however, this might be a good opportunity to have the Earthlings make the first move after this. And once war breaks out, we have Dabura on our side. So, this is interesting. Now, I'm not sure. I don't read Japanese. I don't have any access to the officials, so I'm not sure what the verdict is on Dabura. But at least so far, before this chapter, I tried to avoid as much discourse on this chapter. I probably should look into more discourse before doing the review. I did not. I just did a live reaction and came over here. But with it being the case, Dabura has kind of been established to be the Sumerian king, at least that's how I see him commonly referred to before we got the name Dabura. But now I do question with the way that Maru is talking, or no, the way that Cross is talking, who is Dabura actually? Is he just a very powerful warrior? Is he actually the king? Like is the old guy we saw with the super long ears that kind of looks like Tengen, is he the king? Like, notably, the idea that they have Dabura on their side as like a contingency plan for war obviously feeds with the whole idea that he himself is a Sukuna tier threat, you know, a monster, a beast, a creature, an animal. But at the same time, I do wonder, okay, then who are you? Like, they refer to Dabura, like, he just refers to Dabura so casually, right? He doesn't say, and notably, he doesn't put any prefixes on it. I think that's why I'm so wondering about what Dabura's actual, like, title and or position is. He doesn't say we have King Dabura on our side, obviously, like, King Dabura. And then, notably, I'm saying Dabura, it may be Dabura. I've heard Dabura pronounced both ways, and, like, I've heard, and I'm talking about Dabura from Dragon Ball, by the way, like, the Demon King that appeared for, like, 2 seconds in the Buu Saga. But, and was a very kind of integral part of Daiba. Never actually watched Daima. I don't know. I don't watch much anime, shockingly enough. But with it being the case, Demon King Dabura Udabura, he was the king, naturally, but he was called King Dabura, or King Dabura, in Dragon Ball. Like, even Shin, I believe, when introducing him, was like, oh, that's King Dabura, the king of the demon realm. But for this Dabura, I don't know if he's king. Not only does he just not have any, like, king-like things on him, even if he is compared to Sukuna, the king of curses, Sukuna also wasn't actually royalty or a leader of anything. He was kind of just his own guy. But clearly Dabura actually does have associations, unlike Sukuna. He is seemingly the spear of the Sumerians, if you will. But all that being said, it is very interesting that Sumerians are looking for a reason, right? Obviously, Cross may not speak for all Sumerians, but he is clearly one of our most non-Maru insights. And for him to be like, this is a good opportunity, we have Dabura on our side, and they want the Earthlings to make the first move. And obviously the first move is like any sort of strike attempt. So I do wonder, in my heart of hearts, I am a little bit confuzzled, if you're so confident in war, why aren't you just attacking now, right? Like if Dabura is so powerful that you believe you could take everybody, why don't you, right? Like do we see what I'm talking about? It does seem strange that Dabura is in this position where he's the key to a hypothetical war, but they don't want to actually start a hypothetical war. Is it the idea that they don't want to risk it? Does that have something to do with what they initially left their home planet for? Is their home planet still even a thing? What is Dabura's ability? Like, I don't know. It's interesting. Dabura's position as king has come into question for me, just by the lack of honorifics he's given here. And also, I am interested in what is holding the Sumerians back, right? I will go into this a little bit more when Surugi starts talking about war, thinking about war. But keep in mind that Dabura is here. He may or may not be king. I'm not sure if that's confirmed or not by the translation. That's what I was talking about when I said I don't have the original. I'm not sure if he's possibly called Dabura-sama in the originals and that was just lost in translation. I could check the comments. Actually, I'm kind of scared based on what's in there. Let's check the comments. This is way too sweet. Aliens are crazy powerful. Seeing sort of I'm pretty well by the dawn underscore what? Let's see. I wonder is a connection. Yeah, okay, so nothing about translation or anything, seemingly. I mean, I could click on the spoiler ones, but I'll hold off on it. But essentially, I don't know. Dabura is going to be an interesting character to see more in action and get confirmed on what he is versus what he isn't. And it is notable that he's the only Sumerian of the 4 we've seen so far that has horns. So, like, maybe that's meant to signify his royal blood or something. And notably, he has the longest ears as well. Both Maru and Cross don't have super long ears. They don't have extended ears at all. They have rather normal ears. And both have their third eyes naturally. And notably, now I think about it, Dabura is also the only Sumerian to have his third eye go vertically and not horizontally. If you'll note that Cross's third eye and Maru's third eye, and let's go back to, I believe it's chapter 3? Chapter 3? No, if it's not chapter 3, then maybe chapter 4? Where do they show? Well, maybe back in chapter 2. Yeah, I think it has to be in chapter 2 then. But let me point out the other thing that caught my eye. Yeah, note, once again, horizontal, long ears, but not as long. In fact, interesting, his long ears are tied into his necklace. I never even noticed that until now. But if you look at, yeah, you can even see it. Dabura here, his third eye is vertical, right? Like at least the slit is vertical, and it's a lot larger, and it's markings surrounding it. Meanwhile, all the other Sumerians, including this other hypothetical leader, do not have any markings around theirs, and their third eye is also horizontal. So, with that being the case, back in chapter 6, we do see that the Sumerians, at least seemingly Cross included, are looking for a reason to start war. And we also see that the basketballs and the volleyballs begin to rise all around Maru. Once again, feeding into the idea that all of his abilities are based around rising something or increasing it. And notably, this continues as a theme throughout everything in here, except for obviously like the speaker system, which goes into something completely different. But if you'll notice that the clock itself is consistently spinning, progressing, rising, moving forward. Meanwhile, the seemingly, I think this is like a weight, possibly a grip machine of some sort, and or like just a regular scale, also seems to max out. It's rising, beeping at max point. And obviously all the balls and all the rocks and everything around him is rising. I wonder what Maru's technique is. And we see that Takada goes, anti-gravity? No, it's probably a cursed technique using the concept. No point in thinking about it. But what else can I do? Ultimately, Takada does not retreat from Maru, at least not explicitly. He does still want to battle him, or at least knows that he probably can't escape Maru at this point, as Maru did track him down all the way from the house, and now is currently beating the brakes off of him. But with that being the case, we see the speaker system come on, and we're going to get some peak classic Gege choreography. Well, actually, before that, we get a little flashback and a little mention of a certain fella. I'm so happy to see. Oh, I love seeing him. I love seeing him. But we see that Takada asks himself, why do I have to remember it now of all times? The one and only time I had to flee for my life after a crushing defeat. And obviously, it is Yuji Itadori who is the one that reminds Takada of, or Maru is reminding Takada of in this moment. And that is interesting, right? Notably, Yuji obviously has the ties to Sukuna, and obviously was once a being with multiple eyes when he was possessed by Sukuna, and has direct ties to Sukuna's family lineage. But it is also interesting how old Yuji appears to be here. Because we don't see much of his face outside of his already scarred eye, it seems like this is a Yuji presumably either still in his high school days or possibly in his early 20s. I don't see any sort of wrinkles or anything like that. So Yuji is a person who fought Takada in the past, presumably back when he was still in his, maybe not in his prime? It's hard to tell. Once again, Yuji's presumably gone. We don't know if he's still alive, but the fact that the trader guy, the person who moves people, was like, there's no one like Yuji Itadori Satoru Gojo around at this point, which implies that he's already gone. But it is interesting. He did have effects on the narrative, but obviously he wasn't able to change and save everyone, as we see with Takada here. And notably, I do love the different ways that they stance up. I love the way that Takada, once again, brandishes his sewing needle as if it were a blade of some sort, very specifically. He holds it more so like a traditional sword, like aka... Come here. He essentially holds it, and notably, I wield my katana wrong, mind you. Like, I wield my katana upside down, usually, when it's actually supposed to be wielded like this. So he actually holds the blade like this, which technically is the right way. I think I just always draw it wrong. I have mine upside down. But I love how he holds the blade like this, and specifically puts this up for a guard. He obviously doesn't have, like, a sheath, but he holds the blade like this. And we see that Maru takes a traditional fighting stance. I'm not sure what this is a fighting stance reference to, but knowing Gege, it probably is a reference to a specific fighting style that I just don't know the name of. If you know the name of this fighting style that Maru takes up, please let me know, because I wonder if that is a testament to what all Sumerians do, or once again, if this is a Maru exclusive thing. But we see as he stands up, Takada remembers an encounter with Yuji Itadori. This is interesting though, because it implies Yuji wasn't actually able to catch this guy. And obviously we know this encounter would have had to have taken place after the narrative of JJK. Right? This has to be post JJK because we never saw this interaction. We never met Takada until this point, as far as we know. With it being the case, as the volleyballs rise on Takada's side, we see the basketballs rise on Maru's, and they immediately go back into combat. We see that Maru kicks up. Notably, the two hands extended forward were seemingly a feint, and he kicks up and hits a basketball. Takada immediately goes in, weaving the kick by going under, and then thrusting outward with the needle. And we see Maru actually react in time to grab the needle, redirect it, and then drag Takada into a second kick. And note that Maru initially kicks with his right leg. Then he puts the foot back down as he grabs the needle, tugs Takada into a kick directly with his left. But notably, he does not disarm Takada. He lets Takada's weapon go. And the reason I say this is some classic Gege choreography is very specifically using the environment in a fantastic way, with all the balls rising, the balls becoming obstacles, yet things to complement and bounce off the environment, and even the text being built in, with the speaker announcing, hold on, let me see, 5 seconds remaining. 3, 2, 1, da-da-dum, and then that's when they immediately start fighting. It's very similar to in the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, where there's the instance post the domain clashes where Sukuna and Gojo, they have an interaction, but then they both appear before a red light. They wait, and then they only get right back into action when the red light turns green. And in this case, they only start on the da-dum of the start of the music. And it goes begin, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, bong. And note how Maru's attacks are actually timed with the music, right? Well, at least the attack that he lands, where he lands the hit on the bong, then 1, 2, 3, do, and then he seemingly enough detonates all of the volleyballs that are around Takeda. Once again, if I had to imagine, and I know I'm just focusing on rising so much, I'll probably get sick and tired of it, but he raises and rises the pressure or intensity of the air inside the balls in order to literally detonate them, and they become sort of a flashbang all around Takeda. Notably, not actually doing too much damage, right? The only hit that we see Takeda seemingly still bleed from is the one that Maru got him with earlier, I do believe. Let's see, when did Maru hit him? I think it's when he just, was forced into the building. Oh, no. It's when he got clonked on the dome by the rock initially. And we see that all the explosions don't do anything. They don't add on it, but obviously massive exploding... I'm going to say it anyway. Massive exploding balls do distract Takeda. He does plant himself to not go anywhere, but unfortunately planting himself was probably the worst thing he could have done, as Maru immediately blitzes behind him. Once again, showing that Maru does have a variance in how fast he's moving, despite moving entirely unconsciously, seemingly. Or at least whatever, if you can count the third eye being open as unconsciously. He walks, he blitzes, he swings hard, he goes back to walking, he stances up, then kicks, drags into a kick, sets up into another fake out, only to immediately go back to blitzing. So once again, Maru's speed is varying from slow, standard, reasonable, tactical, to extremely high, down to extremely low, to somewhere in between, consistently. And very specifically, he is seemingly focused on taking Takeda's back, if you'll notice. We see that he's consistently, to quote KH2, reversing around him. As he's facing him, he first approaches from behind Takeda in order to catch him off guard. He turns, he immediately gets hit with the confusion curse technique or the rising curse technique, and then Takeda immediately grabs a stone and goes behind him. Maru immediately grabs a stone and goes behind Takeda, and then Takeda is forced to turn and react to it. Then he once again goes behind him again in order to try and axe kick him. Then he goes around him again after the initial front-facing interaction to try and dome him again with another volleyball. So Maru, even in this instinctual state, knows the advantages of taking the back and consistently is going for it. He's trying to make sure that he's hitting Takeda with the meanest 50-50, but it's a left-right 50-50, and he wants to get that right off. But we see that Takeda does somehow manage to at least react a little bit. He turns in time to get conked on the head by the volleyball. And you'll note that this hit probably should have done more, even if it was just a volleyball, as it only staggers Takeda and knocks one foot off the ground. But then, do, re, mi, 2, and then he times notably not all the hits. Actually, seemingly all the hits, because this is do, re. Wait, no, it should be re, do, 2, do. He lands every single hit seemingly in time with the system's music. Now, is that intentional on Maru's part? Once again, I don't think so. I think it's unconscious, but I do think it's once again Gege showing off their fantastic ability to blend the environment into their combat and time all of Maru's hits with the music still going on in the background. And we see Takeda doesn't get hit once, he doesn't get hit twice, he doesn't get hit thrice, he doesn't get hit 4 times, he doesn't get hit 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8, possibly 9 separate hits. And obviously, he was already 1 foot off the ground, so all these hits in immediate succession send him flying out of the building and straight into the water. And once again, this is a very impressive physical feat. I think, realistically, the only characters who were knocking people through buildings were your Ryus, your Sukunas, your Gojo, so very impressive for, once again, a completely unconscious Maru. While this could be a Zenitsu situation where Maru's actually at his best when unconscious, it still is interesting that in his Berserk state he has access to such raw, insane physical stats. And we see he does send Takeda right out into the water, literally skips him off the water like a rock and causes a tidal wave in the pool itself, splashing the water up. And notably, due to such, because I don't think it's raining at the start of the chapter, the water from the pool literally creates a rain effect that Maru, once again, walks out to. He's consistently changing his speed. However, Takeda notes, strangely enough, the temperature of the water is rising, and we see Takeda leaps out, screaming that it burns. Once again, Maru seems to be raising everything, and then my whole idea about him raising stuff goes right out the window when he spontaneously freezes the water that Takeda was in when he leaps out of it. So, what do I think Maru's curse technique is? I think he has the ability to rise or to raise and lower stuff. Very specifically, raise and lower stuff, but not necessarily just telekinesis because of the water interaction towards the end, and very specifically how this works. If you'll note, in the way that he throws the rock, just physically, raw force of pitching something, and the rock rises, but then suddenly it drops back down in order to dome Takeda, right? Almost as if he can raise and lower things. We see that this may not just extend to physical objects in terms of just lifting them up, but also raising whatever intensity is going on inside them. Because not only does he raise the basketballs and the volleyballs, we see he's able to make them explode. Once again, if this is fitting into the whole raising and lowering thing, it probably fits into the idea that he raised the intensity of the air inside the volleyballs to the point where they burst, right? Sort of like overfilling a ball of any type, and then suddenly it goes boom. That's what happens here. And we see that this whole idea of raising and then sinking again comes with the water, where he raises the heat of the water, the intensity of the energy inside of it, to the point where it becomes a boiling water and actually starts cooking Takeda alive. But immediately, using the fist action, he drains everything out of it. The only reason why I think maybe it's not lowering and raising, at least with the whole fist thing, is one, he has to do an active effort to take the water from boiling hot to freezing immediately. And also, we don't see him do the fist thing here when he lowers the rock back down. But we don't get to see his hand. We only see Takeda's perspective, so I'm not sure if he did the whole in order to cause it to drop again. But we see that Takeda gets locked in ice, which is why I think it has to be raising and lowering. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's just non-physical non-biological matter manipulation. We're just able to control things and how they act on that. With the whole idea that he's able to rise certain, I'm kind of feeding into my own theory, where his ability to rise certain things in their temperature and lift them himself. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. It could just be telekinesis, but the only reason why I feel like it's raising and lowering things as a concept manipulation thing and not telekinesis is because he can freeze the water, right? Unless you say he physically or telekinetically removed all the heat from the water and then telekinetically added a whole bunch of water or heat to the water, I think it would make more sense if you could just directly raise and lower the temperature of certain things, or raise the intensity or lower the intensity of stuff. It would explain why the clock keeps spinning so rapidly, because he's literally raised it to its max point. Same thing with the weight machine going up to its literal maximum, and everything rises up in the air. And then of course the balls explode when the maximum is just a bit too much for them to maintain. However, we see that Maru, still acting entirely autonomously with the third eye, captures Takeda in ice. Takeda is shocked, and Maru, immediately running up the ice, pulls back with the fist, once again showing his mix of his CT application, his physicals, and immediately goes into Dome Takeda, who is clearly already knocked out. You can see that his pupils are gone. It seems like the immediate heat into ice shock completely incapacitated him. And actually, well, no, I can't tell if this is Takeda reading it, and in a very similar vein to other characters being whited out in the manga, he's actually still conscious, but under extreme duress and pain. So I'm not sure if he says this or if this Surugi saying this, since Surugi shows up 2 seconds later. But we essentially get the statement: his curse technique can distort the natural laws of order itself. Probably if by manipulating the concept of raising and lowering something. If I had to hazard a guess. Maybe. I'm not sure. But obviously, it's clear what Maru was going to do here. He was going to dome Takeda. Not give him dome, take his dome off. But we see Surugi manage to somehow, through, once again, his presumable health restriction and just extreme training, be able to get all the way back here and actually intercept Maru's punch. But of course, blocking Maru, who's been shown to be very physically powerful, clearly stronger than Surugi and Yuka, possibly combined at this point, immediately sends both Surugi and Takeda flying out of the ice construct. And we see naturally Surugi's like, ugh, that's enough, Maru. And obviously, he still has the 2 stab wounds in his side, so he immediately goes to hold it. But Surugi immediately recognizes, now that he's up close, I knew it. He's unconscious. Once again, he never changes his face. Even here, it's always the eye emoting. The eye looks really, really intense. The eye is constantly shifting and locking on. But Maru himself, he's... imagine if I recorded a whole review, well, I couldn't because I talk. So I guess, I'd have to, dub the review and post. But, essentially imagine... but I somehow talk with my mouth closed or something like that. Maru himself is completely not here, but his body is still moving and fighting. Once again, how much of the third eye is like instinctual, berserk, regardless, we don't know. But we see, as Surugi recognizes that Maru's unconscious, Cross is still standing by and observing everything. And he's even sort of impressed as he asks, how can he still move with those injuries? It's not a bad situation, however. Ultimately, we see that Cross says, I don't care if Surugi Okotsu harms Maru, or vice versa. Because ultimately, Cross, at least to some degree, is still looking for instigation to start a war. And Surugi clearly understands this, as he thinks to himself, Jutsu sorcerers and the Jutsu headquarters aren't always united. Even among Earthlings, there must be some radical factions out there with a hardline stance. People who want to use the aliens, but don't want to accept them either. And those people are always searching for a reason to start a war. That's why I can't let Maru kill an Earthling, even if he is a curse user. So, that's the idea here, right? Ultimately, the reason Surugi interfered, even though obviously, you know, talking to himself, it's caught a couple bodies, is because any excuse would start something. Right? Like, any excuse would start something. But this is where I go into the idea of what is making the Sumerians wait. Of course, they're only 50,000 strong, and for reference, I believe there are 124 million in Japan. They see? Especially, like, this is far into the future, so maybe the population's only gotten even higher. But how many people are in Japan? Not Japan. Japan. Why is there a period in... I keep saying period in Japan. That's still spelled there. Oh yeah, 124 million as of 2024, so that's probably even higher as of 2025. So obviously I get it. If we do 124 million, and that's not even including the entire planet, but like 124 million divided by 50,000, that's 2,480 times greater. Then let's just do a quick 8 bill for how many people are like actually on the planet. Just for reference, for how many people the Sumerians have to like run through and slaughter. That would be 160,000 times bigger. So there'd be 160,000 humans for every single Sumerian. And it's obvious that not every single Sumerian is Dabura or Cross or Maru. So maybe that's why they're holding back at sheer numbers. But I also like to believe that the Sumerians just don't have the information to know whether or not Dabura actually faces a threat. They clearly know that Dabura is very powerful. Cross is very convinced in Dabura's capacity to the point where if a war were to start, he would essentially be the linchpin. But it seems like either one of two things is true. Either the Sumerians lack the information to know that the Jujutsu Society as it stands now could not actually fight back, and or there still is a card that the Jujutsu Society is holding that they may have flashed to the Sumerians that is keeping them from just outright trying to take over and looking for a reason in the first place, right? Because ultimately, half the time, if you really just want to go for it and you're confident that you could handle it, you don't wait for a reason. If anything, you make one. But Cross is standing by, watching Maru. Maru is here as a diplomatic envoy, all in order to prevent a conflict, even if they are fine with one. So that is interesting. I'm leaning a lot more towards the former idea that the Sumerians just don't have enough information on the sorcerers to actually know that they don't really have any cards pulled up. Yuta's gone, Yuji's gone, Maki's gone, Toto's gone, like Takami's gone, like everyone's gone. So like there really are no threats, but they just don't know that yet, right? Ultimately, the trick of sorcery is deception. I wouldn't be shocked if our extremely skilled Jujutsu sorcerers were like, yeah, that's a really cool possible king guy you got there. Dabura, huh? And a pink little guy from the demon realm named that. Be ashamed if you were to meet our Godura, you know, our knockoff Gojo guys, or he somehow comp at all. I don't know. But that's the thing, right? I'm assuming the aliens just don't know what the full card is and don't want to risk it, but are now looking for the excuse. And we see that Cross even admits a young, innocent civilian is much more fitting than an elderly criminal. Once again, as an excuse to start war from Cross. And naturally, Cross, looking for this, at least seemingly, says, finish him off, Maru. And we see Surugi remember what Maru told him. I want to be friends. And naturally, Surugi is clearly terrified, because of course, Maru is above him here, and now that Maru's been locked onto him, it's presumably he's going to get bloodlusted. But we see, and Surugi thinks, no, maybe I simply don't want him to be a trigger for war. Yeah, and that's the idea that Surugi already has bonded with Maru to the point where he doesn't actually want to fight him. It definitely does not want to ultimately be the reason that Surugi and humans come to conflict, be a conflict born of those two in particular, he himself and Maru. And still, he doesn't want Maru to be a accounts for war in any sense, right? Say Maru were to harm an elderly criminal, that simply would not be good enough. Like essentially, Surugi doesn't want a war at all. He definitely doesn't want Maru to be the start of it. And we see that Surugi demands, Maru, wake up! But of course, the eye is like, me? Wake up. Why did I put you to sleep? And immediately blast Surugi with the same technique that was used on Takeda. But of course, Surugi does actually manage to resist a little bit, and very unlike our, guy who deals with people. And he demands one more time as he barely stands with the blade in his hand. He says, wake up! I thought we were going to be neighbors, remember? And we see that this, in particular, the idea of connection, coexistence, the possibility of it, and Surugi's desire and Maru's clear desire for coexistence is enough to spark something in Cross, even as Maru is still blasting out whatever this presumable increase or rising wave is, enough that it actually knocks out Surugi in a second. We see that, like I mentioned all the way back at the start, the aura loss must be quantified, because we do know that Cross is the younger twin brother, and he appears before Maru and simply says, calm yourself, Maru. And instantaneously, everything collapses from the stones that were rising, and Maru himself straight to the ground, as Surugi also barely manages to maintain himself and gets knocked out as well. Both of the new two of our new trio fall out to the ground immediately. And we see that Cross actually didn't seemingly want war, and does clearly have some desire to see what his brother also wants to see, coexist with humans, and that desire from a human to coexist was enough to cause him to interfere and not let a war happen, which would have been very easy to justify if Maru had gone on to slay Surugi or really just slain Takeda himself if Surugi didn't interfere. This does make me wonder, though, how much of this is Maru, or how much of this is Cross's genuine want for coexistence, and also just Maru not wanting his brother to be a trigger for war. Notably, it's hard to tell who this line is coming from, right? Because we see Cross and Surugi talking, though, and I want to think this line is from Surugi. This could be a case where both don't want him to be a trigger for war. While Surugi may be actually thinking it, Cross may actively want it, but just not be able to articulate it. And that is what causes him to interfere. And very specifically, once he interferes, he's actually annoyed with himself. As he says, darn it, what am I doing? This was beyond his actual conscious thought. Once again, going with the idea that the third eye being active and active exclusively sort of brings out the truest version, or at least the strongest version of a Samodian. In this case, this was Cross's most base and instinctual reaction to either A, stop a war from happening, protect his brother, B, stop a war from happening by allowing his brother to still be a conscious being by stopping him from his berserk rampage, and or C, to aura farm. It could be all three. But with that being the case, this was not supposed to be this long of a review. How have I been here for 52 minutes? I was bringing things that way to it. But essentially, those are my main points. I do like the idea that Cross is actually more like caring for Maru and the human Samurian coexistence than others may seem. I do like the idea that Surugi is able to acknowledge that the Jujutsu society is still fractured and splintered, and there are many different people who want many different things from the Samurians in their existence. I do like that. I love this version of Maru. Once again, he is aura farming. It is rather inconsistent on how he aura farms, from the speed blitz to the slow walk to everything in between, but still, I really, really like it. I love the combination of the physicals of his fighting style with the clear curse technique application of it. I love the vagueness of it right now. Obviously, I'm not expecting an explanation anytime soon, and I don't really want an explanation anytime soon. Once again, I'm still going to stick entirely to the idea that is entirely based on him raising and lowering things, whether it be their intensity and or their function in some way, shape, or form. The balls get the air inside them raised to intensity that they explode. Maru is able to raise and then lower the rock that pitches and destroys Takeda's dome. He's able to raise and lower the temperature, the heat / intensity of the molecules in the water, causing them to go from extremely hot to extremely cold. All those manipulations seem really, really cool. I love how he fights. This does definitely feel like a classic, like, Gege style fight between a high tier and a, like, low tier or mid tier, essentially. And I would say high tier and a mid tier, right? It feels very, how do I put it? It feels very Nanami, or no, not, well, yeah, kind of, well, Naobito versus Dagon-esque, where one side has a clear advantage, but isn't one-shotting the other. And that seems to be the case here. It reminds me of Gege style fights there, and obviously the creativity behind it all, the choreography, it's all fantastic. And the character work for Surugi and Maru, once again, just reinforces that I do like their dynamic more than the Yuka and Maru dynamic, but I just think Yuka definitely just needs more time. I hope she gets a moment to flex pretty soon. She hasn't really had a solid moment to flex since chapter 1. She had her moment with the Marmalade Boy, but like it didn't feel as good because, you know, it was still a shared moment. I do want some more Yuka exclusive stuff. But overall, a very, very W chapter. Let me hit it for the 2 times. If you haven't always seen this video, please leave an eye for an eye. Even though I'm pretty sure I've done that before. Leave an eye for an eye in the comment section down below. I did thank you so much for watching. Remember to leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. Make sure the notifications so you don't miss out on any videos that come to the channel. Also you have a Patreon below, you support me for as low as $1. Come on. These exclusive videos, other content, and more. So now become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. So those perks include live reactions here, the series I have to review, including the 15-minute live reaction to this very chapter, and variations of all my videos. And if you come to $12 Patreon, $12 member, you can order whatever video you want. Also get your names at the end of all videos, because I greatly appreciate it. Please, any support is always worth it. But also I do link to my co-foundation down below. You drop 5 views for a short video, 20 being a small video, or any views at all. Any support is always greatly appreciated. Now, if you thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is That on the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give thank you to our sketch tier members: Eternal Flame, Red Wolf 4765, Astro, Glacier XZ, Zera, Brandon Payne, J2MA, Guillaume, Buddha Ura, Alex Kenny, Enzo, Swift Strike, Super Flame 0, Yuki Ally, Azo2404, Striker Man, Aso8, Plant Crone, Grim, Black Sage, Marco222, Straw, Twisted, Ollie, The Boy, Corey Watson, Damon Brown, Magic, and CCC. Then, I'd like to give a thank you to our line art tier patrons: A+A, Kevin, Encarnacion, Dread Zoan, Sean, and Midnight Lord 21. Then, I'd like to give a thank you to our Ink tier members: Austin Wimberly Auchia, King RTX, and then Shrimpo the 4th Shrimp 06. Then, I'd like to give a thank you to our digital art tier members: J Warrior and AZ Void. Then, I'd like to give a final thank you to our colored art tier patrons: Walkie Munoz and Walkie Munoz.